Well, Jim, why don't we begin by your telling us a bit about Astor Services?
Well, thank you, Doug. Astor is a fairly comprehensive, multi-region, child-oriented, community-based organization. We have been operating since 1953, and we started as an experiment. And the experiment was to provide an alternative treatment for kids that would normally have been in a state psychiatric hospital. So our programs really evolved out of that. And so Astor provides a range of children's mental health services in the Hudson Valley and in the Bronx. In addition, we do early childhood services, including Head Start and Early Head Start. So when you think about kids from birth until 21 who have emotional problems, who have challenges with education, Astor is typically doing something on their behalf. Right now, Astor has a budget of over $60 million. We have over 800 staff, and we serve between 7,000 and 8,000 kids a year.
Well, thanks, Jim, for that overview. Now, our subject today is, of course, the executive leadership structure you've created with the Chief Executive Officer, you, Jim, and the Chief Operating Officer, you, Renee. Why don't you tell us, Jim, how you arrived at that decision to create a Chief Operating Officer position? Tell us a bit about the process you went through.
Well, it actually started as a result of a crisis that the agency faced. And so think about Astor. When I started as CEO in 2002, we had a budget of about $30 million. And in that time, we basically doubled in size. More importantly, the diversity of our program mix became much more complex, and the requirements of each of the programs, the accountability demands just increased exponentially. But it was really a crisis that precipitated the need to create this position. We had a serious quality issue in one of our programs. And the board was involved in it, and our regulatory agencies were involved in it, and they really said to us, listen, you've got to make some major changes in this program if you want to continue to provide this service. And clearly, as the CEO, it really fell on me to saying, okay, what did I let drop that allowed this problem to get out of hand? And so we engaged a consultant, and it was a consultant that worked very closely with me, but reported directly to the board. And I know that a lot of CEOs would say, well, how can that be? That must have been very difficult. But it was really, I think, that partnership that allowed the creation of an organizational structure that met the needs of the organization, and it was something that I could support wholeheartedly. And it was really working with that consultant and the board to look at a structure that would bring in another person that could pay better attention to the day-to-day operations. What we discovered is I had 12 people who were reporting to me. And I knew in my heart that that was too many people. And when I thought about reducing that number, it was at a time when there were a lot of fiscal challenges as well. So the idea of bringing on an additional expense really was difficult to sell and to swallow. So it was really the crisis of this program that led to the creation of this structure. And so I think it's important that everybody know that it wasn't, me saying, okay, we need to do it, but it was obviously something happening in the board saying, you need some help in here. And the consultant, who I work very closely with, who I have a lot of respect for, it was somebody who I knew and so had confidence in, really worked collaboratively with me and looked at the structure, looked at the board, and looked at a variety of different organizational structures that seemed to fit. And it was really, together, we came up with a structure where the COO was reporting directly to me, and together we created the levels of responsibility and accountability for the CEO. So we now have a structure where the COO is responsible for everything that happens in the program. And so not only overseeing the program operations, but the human resources and the facilities related to that operation.
Who reports to you, Jim, in this structure directly, other than your Chief Operating Officer?
Okay, so with that, we did create a reduced structure, and we call it the strategic team. And reporting to me is the COO, the Chief Financial Officer, the Chief Quality and Compliance Officer, and our Executive Vice President for the Foundation.
And who reports to Renee as Chief Operating Officer?
Well, Renee, why don't you talk a little bit about your direct reports?
Sure. So I have human resources, operations, which includes IT, and then all of the program areas. That includes education, it includes care management, residential services, the medical director, and our two regional directors, one for the Bronx and one for the Hudson Valley.
So you're a pretty busy person.
Very happily busy person, but yes.
Happily. Good. Well, what attracted you to this position, Renee? What was really appealing to you?
Sure. So there were three things when I really boil it down that drew me here. One is the mission of the organization. Since I was very, very young, I've been driven to work with young children, particularly vulnerable children, and I knew well the work that happened at Astor, and that just really called to my heart that that's what I want to do. And I'm very careful in how I spend my time, and I know that when I'm at work, I want to be doing work that really fills me up, and I knew that this was a place that I would experience that. Two, having been an executive director twice before coming here, I know how incredibly important the relationship is between the ED and the board, and I assumed that the relationship between a COO and a CEO has a similar dynamic in that for me personally, I need to believe in the leader that I'm working for, and I need to have some synergy around that person. And I had known Jim previously, so I knew that he was a person of integrity, that he was honest, and that he was really committed to the mission. So I knew that would be an exciting proposition. And then third, for me, was the idea of the complexity of this organization, that I was full on ready for a challenge like this. I had run two much smaller organizations, but being the executive director of both of those agencies, I had my hand in everything because they were small and I didn't have infrastructure. So the idea of going from a $2 million agency to being the COO of a $60 million agency was just indescribably exciting to me, to think that I could have that opportunity to work with such a complex system and always be, every day, you have something of high interest to engage in.
So you wanted a real challenge, and you got it.
I did.
Well, Jim, how has implementation gone thus far, and are there any particular challenges you've had to deal with getting this structure fully implemented?
Yes. So the good news is that I did have a knowledge and a working relationship with Renee. So it wasn't, the issue of me getting to know Renee at a certain level. I had that. The issue was really the executive team. There were, 12 people reporting to me, and under the new structure, they would be reporting to somebody different who's not the CEO. And so that was the first major challenge. They saw this as a demotion. And even though their titles didn't change, their salary didn't change, it really was viewed as a demotion because they weren't able to now deal directly with the CEO. And so that was really, I think, the first challenge. And it was really something that started prior to hiring the COO. And they were engaged in the structures, and we wanted their feedback, and I got their feedback in terms of what they liked, what they didn't like. But I was also very clear that the board has a big say in this as well. But it was really that challenge that I think was critical to address as quickly as possible, and making sure that whatever I did, I supported the new person, and that all my interactions really continued to support the success of the new structure.
Great. So it's going well. It's firmly established.
I think we're about 2.5 years into this.
Mm-hmm.
And I think from my point of view, it's going extraordinarily well, because all of that work that Renee took on, took it off of my plate. And so it allowed me to breathe, and it certainly allowed me to see things differently. And what was also important, it allowed Renee to focus in a very intense way on program and on program operations.
How has it basically changed your job as Chief Executive Officer, Jim? What's been the real change in terms of how you allocate your time?
Well, it's a lot easier dealing with 4 people than it is 12. So when you think about the time, and it allows me to focus on the things a CEO needs to work on, which is strategic positioning of the organization, its planning, its external relations. At the same time, I am currently the president of a statewide coalition for children's behavioral health, so it allowed me to give attention to that, while at the same time I know that somebody's taking care of business in the organization.
So you've actually strengthened the chief executive position while strengthening internal management at the same time. Sort of a win-win, right?
I think so. And Renee, how do you think it's going from your point of view?
Well, I think it's going really well. I think it had an opportunity to go very poorly had we not launched it with some really transparent understandings of one another, who we would be to one another, and also if we had lacked, Jim and I were talking earlier about the synergy that we have in sharing the same view on how we should be caring for children and caring for their families. So I think that had we not had that, it could have gone down the wrong path. But considering all of the complexities of the organization, I think it's gone really, really well. I feel very supported in my position because of the way Jim leads. I feel relieved when I see that he is focusing on the external environment, because I know he's bringing that the best of those learnings back to the organization and driving us forward in a progressive way rather than being bogged down with things here. And I feel really fully empowered to make sometimes very, very hard decisions that even if Jim has to sort of wince when I'm maybe telling him about next steps, he's always very supportive of those next steps in every way. So I couldn't be happier.
Great. Well, tell me, Renee, what are the 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 things you do, you and Jim, to keep this relationship healthy and keep it from eroding? How do you maintain the CEO-COO partnership?
We talk a lot. I'm probably his only direct report that doesn't have formal supervision scheduled with him, and I never felt that we needed to do that because I really appreciate the opportunity to access him anytime that I really needed to, whether it's texting him when he's out somewhere or dropping in his office. And many days could go by that I don't necessarily need that guidance, but knowing that it's always available has been helpful. Another ingredient for our success, I think, is that we're both very honest people, and so I am trying to make sure that he always particularly knows any bad news immediately so that he's never caught by surprise on anything. And the way he receives that information makes that very easy to do. What else has really helped us? The communication is just it's so fundamental. Jim and I were also talking earlier about the way he really lets me have a lot of autonomy in the work that I'm doing, but not to my detriment. So understanding that I was new to behavioral health when I came here, I had experience with foster care, but that was a very small part of the work that happens at Astor. And he empowered this position to make decisions and empowered me, but he also guides me along the way. So he has, I think, what's kind of a unique gift at stepping back, observing what's happening, and letting me know privately, never publicly, that, oh, you might want to be paying a little bit more attention to that, or look out for this, or I'm feeling this, and I respond to that, but never in an intrusive way. So I feel empowered, and I can move forward down this path. And as synergistic as we are, we're also very different people. I think I'm a little bit more risk tolerant sometimes than Jim might be, and he allows space for that and also allows space for mistakes, because when you are risk tolerant, you do make mistakes along the way, and he allows it to be a healthy environment for that to happen, and that results in lots of innovation and energy. I hope that answers the question.
Jim has been as much a mentor to you as a boss.
Yes. He's also my first boss.
Pardon?
He's also my first boss that I've ever had on site.
But apparently you've adapted well.
Yes.
To having a boss. Great. Well, listen.
So as Renee said, communication between the two of us was key. But what was also important, that I knew that she was able to be laser focused on making important staff changes. And so we had to make some moves on staff that have been with the organization a long time. But it was because of our communication, I, with great confidence, knew that she was making these moves in a very respectful way, that it wasn't just, cutting and slashing and burning. It was really thoughtful, concerned about the employees, and giving them every opportunity to be successful. And as a result, we've made moves, and the results really showed significant improvement in program quality.
Great. I assume, by the way, the board's been behind you to 100% throughout this process.
Very much so. Very much so.
Thanks, Jim and Renee, for this excellent briefing on the CEO-COO structure you've successfully implemented at Astor Services for Children and Families. Really appreciate your time.